Well, good afternoon and welcome to today's Baptist Together webinar. Today we're dealing with the topic of payroll. My name is Richard Wilson. I'm the Support Services Team Leader at the Baptist Union of Great Britain. And my team look after finance and legal and a number of areas. I'm delighted to be joined today by Karen Peacock, who heads up the West of England Baptist Payroll Company. Who is going to help us with this webinar. The West of England Baptist Payroll Company probably do payroll for more Baptist churches than any other organisation, and so I think Karen is uniquely qualified to talk on this topic for Baptist churches. So without further ado, I will hand over to Karen, and she will lead us through today's webinar.
Thank you. Thanks, Richard. Yeah, like Richard said, my name is Karen Peacock and I'm the manager at the West of England Baptist Payroll Company. We do the payroll for churches all over the country, not just the West of England. So yeah, we'd like to just have a general run through of what you need to cover when you're running a payroll, and we hope it'll be of some use to you. So some of the things we're going to cover in this webinar, there's quite a few on this list, so don't worry. I'm going to do an introduction to payroll, setting up a payroll, approaches to running a payroll. We're going to cover starters and leavers. We're going to do an overview of PAYE, as you can see, they're including HMRC payments. Pensions and auto enrolment, which is a very hot topic at the moment, minimum wage, some benefits, for example, holiday pay, sick pay and maternity pay, payslips and record keeping, handling expenses and benefits, and year-end processes. So quite a few items to go through there. As with anything, we could drill into each of those items in quite a lot of detail, but we're going to try and just do a general overview of some of these subjects. And if you have got any questions, then just feel free to ask, and we'll do our best to answer them for you. Okay, so the first thing really to answer is, who is this webinar for? Essentially, this is a webinar is for anyone that is running a payroll system or wants to run a payroll system, is looking to employ staff for the first time, in the hope that you'll gain some useful information. Even if you have someone else that runs your payroll for you, you may still find this webinar useful to have a general understanding of how payroll works within the church. When do you need to have a payroll? If you employ any staff, is the honest answer there. You need to have a payroll, even if you're just paying someone £50 a month. If they're employed by you, you have to have a payroll service that you can run. There is obviously small differences if someone's self-employed and they invoice you, but essentially if you employ anyone, then you need to have a payroll system in place. Some of the things that need to be included in your payroll, who needs to be included in your payroll is very similar to the previous point, really. Anyone that you want to pay a wage to, like I said, whether they're a minister, a cleaner, an admin staff, anyone you're physically paying money to needs to go onto your payroll. So the first thing I think would be good to look at is how to set up a payroll system. So we do get calls from a lot of churches that are looking to employ someone for the first time. They've never actually had a payroll, never actually employed anyone previously. So the first thing you would need to do is to register as an employer with HMRC, and they would give you a scheme reference, like a PAYE reference and an accounts office reference. And I think that's the link that we've put in there that would take you to the HMRC webpage, is that right? Yeah, that we put in. Yeah, that will take you to the HMRC page, and you register as an employee. You just give the church's name, address, that sort of thing, and they will, within a few days, they will come back to you with the information that you need. Another thing you'll need to do is, whether you've already got a payroll running or not, if you take on a new member of staff, you will need to ensure that your staff have written contracts of employment or terms of appointment. This includes things like, you know, how many hours they might be working for you, whether they're entitled to sick, if they go off sick, are they just going to be paid sick pay, or are you going to make it up to full pay? How much holiday they're entitled to. Again, get quite a lot of people sort of calling and saying, oh, how much holiday do I need to pay this person, or do I need to pay them sick pay? And that's why it's always important you've got a contract in place so you can easily refer back to that and see what terms were agreed when you took that employee on at the time. You also need to select how you're going to run your payroll, an approach to running your payroll. And I think that's what we're going to deal with on the next slide. There are some various ways you can run your payroll. There is a free software on the HMRC website, the basic tools, and I know a lot of people do use this and find it very easy and useful to use. So that is a payroll system within the HMRC software that you can use for free and report to them, etc. every month. You could also pay to use a commercial software package, for example, Sage, you know, QuickBooks, certain payroll packages you can use to run your payroll, and you just need to check that every year they're updated with the latest legislation, etc. As I said, the HMRC software is free, but those other packages you generally do pay for. Or you can outsource to a payroll company like myself, the West of England Baptist Payroll Company, and they, in effect, will run your payroll for you so that you don't have to worry about it. And one of the benefits of outsourcing, of course, is that they've, you know, whoever you use has got some knowledge of payroll, and we particularly have knowledge of Baptist churches, how their payroll is supposed to run, and we can keep you up to date with things like minimum wage legislations and all those sort of things. So, you know, if you are looking to run a payroll, or you're already running a payroll and you want to change the way you run it, those are the main ways that you would be thinking of to run that payroll. So one of the things that when you're running a payroll is you will have to deal with starters and leavers. So if you take on a new member of staff, there are various things you have to do to check that they, you know, before you set them up on the system. You have to complete, apologise, start again. One of the things they should be able to give you if they've come from a previous employer is their P45. And that will detail how much they've earned already this year with their tax details. And you can use that when you're setting them up on your system to let HMRC know how much they've had before when you're calculating their pay. If they don't have a P45, then you can fill in a form P46, and that just gets them to tick whether they've got another job, whether they've had another job, etc. within this tax year. And a lot of the time, if you're using software packages, there's a place for you to tick that on the system. And it's quite important that you have that, because it does help calculate what their pay is going to be going forward with your job, how much tax they need to be paying, national insurance, and etc. really. You need to obviously get a starter form with their personal details, name, date of birth, address, national insurance number, etc. Again, you can get that from your software supplier, or HMRC, I think, have a starter checklist within their website. Also need things like their bank details, so you know where you're going to be paying them. You may need to get an email address to send them copies of their payslips, general personal information really. And one of the most important things is to complete any pre-employment checks. You must check your employee's right to work on every single employee. Even if you know they were born in London, in England, wherever, you still have to do a pre-employment check. And that's usually getting a copy of their passport, maybe something along those lines. And again, the HMRC do have a really good checklist for right to work. So if they haven't got a passport, there are other things that they can you can take and tick, and they give you that information that you'll need. If someone decides to leave your employment, you just need to firstly just calculate anything that they're entitled to as their last, within their last pay packet, any overtime, any holiday pay that's owed to them. Just calculate, try and get it as correct as possible for that final pay slip so that you don't have to make any corrections later. Once you have paid them their final balance, their final amount, you need to issue them a P45, and they then, that again is produced within your software, and they can then take that to their next employer, again, like they would have done, you would do with starters. And just in your submission that you send to your RTI submission that you send to HMRC, you just need to mark them that they're a leaver and the date that they've left, and that will notify HMRC that they have left your employment, and they won't show up on the system in the next months going forward.
Karen, can I just ask, you've talked a lot about employment in this.
Yeah.
Obviously, a number of our Baptist ministers are appointees. They're not strictly legally employed.
Yes.
Yeah. How does this, what you've spoken about, apply to them?
Yes, that's a really good point. I know a lot of ministers are on a stipend. They're not necessarily officially, you wouldn't call it necessarily a salary or wages, but they are still, from a legal point of view, they are still considered as employed by you, and you still have a duty of responsibility to make sure that they get their holiday pay and sick pay, etc. So in the eyes of the law, from a payroll point of view, they are considered as an employee, although your contract might say something slightly different, but you have to treat them in the same way as any other employee with their entitlements for holiday and sick and maternity pay, paternity, etc.
Okay. Yeah. No, thank you for that. That's helpful.
Oh, that's good. That's a good point. Okay, so moving on to PAYE, pay as you earn. These subject PAYE and national insurance is often the areas I find that confuse people the most, actually. There are three main elements to this. There's the tax that would be deducted from your employee's wage that they owe, the tax that they owe to HMRC. There's also employees' national insurance, again, which is what they owe based on how much they earn. And there's employers' national insurance, and that is national insurance that an employer owes on behalf of that employee. There are various thresholds for this, and I think we've got a link to that. For example, you have to earn around £700 a month before you pay national insurance, for example. Tax is very much based on what your tax code is and how much you've earned, previously throughout the year, and national insurance is more based on how much you earn that particular month. So if you have a bonus, for example, or some overtime, you'll pay slightly more in national insurance. But the thresholds, if you want to check them, are available on the link that's shown to you on the screen there. So we'll just go into them in a little bit more detail. So the first thing, when you decide how much you're paying your employee, for example, you may pay them £1,000 a month. Then from that, you have to calculate any tax that they owe and national insurance that they owe to HMRC. That figure is then deducted, and you're left with a net pay figure, and that is the figure that actually goes into the employee's bank account. So it's usually calculated within the software, within the HMRC free software, or within the commercial software that you may be using. So you calculate that first of all, and with any other deductions, and then you pay the staff their net pay. You then have to work out how much of that money, the tax and the national insurance that you owe to HMRC. So you just add those figures together for all your employees, and then you have to make a payment for that money to HMRC by the 21st of the following month. So that's the employer's responsibility to pay that money to HMRC, not the employees. And you need to also submit an RTI return sometimes called an FPS, a full payment submission. RTI is real-time information. You submit that to HMRC every time you pay your staff. Some people pay their staff weekly, some people pay their staff monthly, some might do it fortnightly, weekly. However often you do it, every time you do it, you have to submit one of these submissions to HMRC. So once a week, once a month, etc. And that should be done before the pay date. And if there's any errors, you can make a correction, but generally it has to be done before the pay or before the pay date that you pay your staff.
And that's usually done automatically within your software?
Again, within the software. This is why the software is so good, that you generally just click on a button and it brings it up, you double check it and you press a button and it usually goes straight through to HMRC electronically. It used to be that you might have to do it separately, send a check or send a form off to them, but it's all done electronically now and you can just pay them straight into their bank account, like I say, by the 21st of the following month. The other thing that you can claim is that about 3 years ago, I think it was, the government brought in an employer's national insurance allowance. It was £2,000 and recently it's gone up to £3,000. In effect, this basically means for the first £3,000 of employer's national insurance that you owe, the government will waive it. So some churches won't even reach that £3,000 limit. If you've got one, perhaps minister on a standard stipend, you will never go above that £3,000 that you owe. So it's just important to keep track of how much that is each month, and when you do get to the £3,000, know you've reached the limit and start to make the payments. Again, it should be calculated within your software, but it's just handy to know that you can just keep track of it. I find every month, just to be on the safe side, really. And again, there's a link there that will take you through to the Baptist Union website with a little bit of information about that.
And usually you have to select in your software to say you're entitled to that. To that,
yes. So usually the start of a new tax year, when you move your payroll system onto a new tax year, there's a little box you can often tick that just says, yes, we're going to claim the £3,000 national insurance allowance.
Yeah. So if you find your software is not giving you that allowance, then
that could be one of the reasons. Yeah, definitely go back and have a look at maybe the settings page and check that box has been ticked, because it should calculate it, like we said, automatically for you. So if you don't think it is, it's certainly worth just double checking that. And in most occasions it will actually add it on, because it is something you officially owe, and then deduct it back off for you. So on all your reports, it is good to show that actually this is how much you owe for employers' national insurance, but you're within the allowance, particularly for budgeting purposes, because although they've had it for a few years now, there's no guarantee that will be around every single year. No. But at the moment, it doesn't show any signs of going away. So it's just worth knowing that, just in case, really.
Okay.
Okay, now everyone take a deep breath. Pensions and auto-enrolment. This is such a big subject over the last couple of years. It's probably the thing I get asked most about. You've probably all seen the adverts on the telly as well about auto-enrolment and offering your staff a chance to join a pension scheme. In a nutshell, under auto-enrolment regulations, as an employer, you must offer all staff a chance to join a pension scheme, regardless of what they earn. There are 3 different levels in effect. Staff, anyone earning above £10,000 a year, which is about £833 a month, I think. So anyone earning over £10,000 a year, they must automatically be enrolled into a compliant, you can see we've highlighted that, compliant pension scheme. The Baptist Union is a compliant pension scheme. Nest is the one that the government have set up, particularly for auto-enrolment. It's the People's Pension. Excuse me, they are all compliant pension schemes. If you have a minister or a staff member who's in a scheme, for example, maybe something like Standard Life Scottish Widows, there's no guarantee, even if you're paying into it, there's no guarantee that that is a compliant scheme. So you must just double check that that is compliant for auto enrolment. Now, if that staff member you put that person that's earning £10,000 into a scheme, for example, the BU scheme, and they don't want to stay in the scheme, that's absolutely fine. They can opt out. They ring up and just say, I don't want to be in the scheme anymore, but they have to have been enrolled in the scheme to do that. And if they've made any contributions, then that would get refunded to them. They can only opt out within about 30 days. I think they get about a month to opt out. So it's important that if your staff member does want to opt out, they do that straight away. If it's done after 3 months, then they can opt out again, but they don't get any refunds. They just stay in the scheme. So that's quite good. That's a general feeling. If they earn over £10,000 a year, they must be enrolled into a scheme. If they earn less than £10,000 a year, there are a couple of different levels. If they earn, I think it's about 6,000, you have to offer them the chance to join the pension scheme. If they want to join, they can, and you have to contribute. And if they earn less than that, then they can ask to join the scheme, but you don't have to contribute as an employer. So there's 3 different levels, but the pensions regulator website's got quite a lot of information on there about thresholds, but it's just good to have a general understanding of it. Every church has probably reached their what we call the staging date, which is where you had to offer that date by, that pension scheme by. And as you can see, we've put up there a declaration of compliance must be completed with the pensions regulator. And in that, you're simply just saying how many staff you've got, whether you've put them into a pension scheme, etc. The good news is that every 3 years you have to redo that. Yeah. And I would imagine there's quite a few churches coming up this year or the start of next year. There was a good few that staged in 2016, 2017. So I would imagine that there's a lot of churches that will be coming up again for the 3-year declaration. And you just have to go through the whole process again, basically.
Yeah. So my church has just gone through the re-enrolment process. As it happened, we didn't have anybody who needed to be re-enrolled, but we did have to go through the checks and then do the declaration of compliance on the pension regulator website. It's actually quite straightforward to do. They have put quite a lot of effort into making it straightforward. But equally, we do see that the pensions regulator is being quite aggressive in enforcement. So if you don't do your declaration of compliance, then they are likely to start taking enforcement action. We might just start with a snotty letter, but we have certainly seen them taking, not Baptist churches yet, and hopefully never will be, but we have seen pensions regulator taking enforcement action against employers where they feel they aren't meeting the obligations under auto enrolment. And it's really important to emphasise here that actually even if an employee over the £10,000 threshold doesn't want to be enrolled, you have to enrol them. Even if they say beforehand, I really don't want to and I will opt out, you are obliged to opt them in. And this is in order, the pension regulator is very keen that there is no disincentive to an employee enrolling. And they really are very keen that as many people as possible are enrolled into a pension such that they have savings for when they come to retirement. So please do bear that in mind.
And you can't, you can't be seen to be discouraging them. If an employee does want to opt out, you're not actually allowed to sort of help them do that. They have to do that on their own. You're not allowed to be seen to be encouraging someone to opt out. They want you to go in. So even like Rich says, if they really don't want to go in, you've still got to put them in, and then they opt out later. And the declaration is quite good. And if you use a payroll provider, the chances are they will probably do it for you anyway, as long as you've complied. So it's certainly worth looking and asking them if you do have someone that does that, if they will do that for you. But it is quite straightforward, and they do ask the questions in quite a straightforward way, don't they? So that's just that's a big subject at the moment, and it's really important you get it right, because like we said, I've seen situations, I've heard of stories where they are starting, if they're not compliant, they are starting to fine people, and actually it's something you can do fairly easily, so as to avoid getting a fine, etc. It's not too complicated.
It's worth saying that if your minister is enrolled in the Baptist pension scheme, then that is a compliant pension scheme, and
exactly.
That's all you need to do.
If you've got staff in a scheme, it's not actually an issue. You just need to do the declaration. The problem more comes where you had someone in a scheme, they opted out, and then 3 years later you've got to put them back into the scheme and then they opt out again.
Yeah.
But if you've got a couple of staff in a pension scheme or they're earning less than £10,000, in theory you haven't got to do too much. You've just got to do the declaration. Okay.
Right.
Okay. So the next thing we're going to quickly talk about is minimum wage. I mean, this is quite, as you can see, we've put up on the screen here. From the 1st of April this year, you have to offer you have to be paying your staff at least this wage, and you can see that if they're 25 and over, they need to be paid at least £8.21 an hour. So it's just important to check what you're paying your staff. A lot of people will know what their staff are paid hourly, but some people, if you've recently taken over as a treasurer, for example, or payroll, you might not be 100% sure. So you could look at what they're paid monthly, times it by 12 to get the annual wage, divide it by 52, and then to get the weekly wage, and then divide it by how many hours they work. That should tell you how much they are paid per hour. But it's just you need to be checking this. This again is a massive thing. If you're not paying minimum wage, then you could get into trouble for that. So just take note of these new new amounts, and just check that your staff are being paid these from April 2019, from next month. And you can't rely on your staff necessarily to tell you. You need to be responsible for that and check that they are earning that much money per month. You'll probably find that some of them are already being paid over that, but it's just worth double checking, really. Slightly different to the living wage. Yep. This is the minimum wage. The living wage. This is compulsory, the minimum wage, and that's the figures there for you to just take a note of if you want to. Okay. So on to some benefits now that all staff are generally entitled to. Holiday pay. So holiday, yay. As much as you might not want your staff to take time off, they are all entitled to 5.6 weeks basic pay, holiday pay per year. And that includes the 5.6 weeks there includes the bank holidays. So in effect, it's 4 weeks is the minimum, and then the 8 bank holidays comes to the 5.6 weeks. Of course, that's prorated for part-time staff. If they work 2 days a week, then it's 5.6 times 2 days a week, etc. And all staff are entitled to that. You may want to give your staff more holiday entitlement than 4 weeks basic, but that is the legal requirement. And you just need to know when your holiday year runs from. It might run from January to December, April to March. Just know when your holiday year runs from, and check that your staff are taking their holiday. And if they leave, they may be entitled to some holiday pay, etc. So that's just worth double checking. Sick pay. Now this is a slightly can be slightly confusing. You used to be able to claim sick pay back from HMRC. And you can no longer do that now. They stopped it when they brought the £3,000 employers' national insurance allowance in. So if you want to pay your staff sick pay, you're paying them that money. You can't reclaim it back. Now, this is why we said earlier about getting terms of appointment in your contract are correct, because are you going to just pay them statutory sick pay, which is about £92 a week, I think, or are you going to pay them the statutory sick pay but then make them up maybe to full pay for a period of time? They have to earn, I think, £116 a week before they qualify for sick pay. So if they only earn that per month, for example, and they're off sick, then they either go unpaid or you choose to pay them if you want to be generous there. But if they're entitled to statutory sick pay, then that's what they're entitled to. So you have to pay that money, and you can't claim that back from anyone. And if you want to make it up to full pay, you can do. It really just depends on what the terms of their contract are. You may want to make it up to full pay for a couple of weeks, but if they're off long term, you don't. do believe with ministers there may be something in the terms of appointment that they get it made up to full pay for a certain period of time.
The standard conditions, terms of appointment for ministers, give them 6 months on full pay.
On full pay, yeah.
It's worth just chipping in there actually that under the Baptist pension scheme, if someone is either a member of the staff section or the ministers section, so not the basic section, if they're a member of the staff section or the minister section, then there is a long-term sick benefit, an income protection benefit, which will kick in after 6 months and pay somebody who is under those schemes a sizable benefit. One thing that's important is you do need to notify the scheme promptly if a person in those schemes goes off sick, such that benefit will kick in after 6 months. If you don't, then there is a risk that the insurer refuses to pay out until that 6 month period has elapsed, and then at that point there's potentially a liability on the employer to cover the difference. So we wouldn't recommend. We would recommend making sure that notification goes in. I think it has to be within the first month of them being off sick, if it looks like it's going to be a long running problem. And we would generally advise on the side of, if you're not sure if it's going to run for more than 6 months, best to notify such that the benefit will kick in if you get to that stage.
And even if you are making their pay up to full pay, you still need to process sick pay through the system and make it up to full pay, just for record keeping purposes. And also if it's for like an admin member of staff, for example, then it could be that after 6 months, when the sick pay stops, because that's what they're entitled to, they can't claim benefits if you haven't recorded it properly, sick pay benefits if, for example, their employment comes to an end because of their sickness. So always record it on your system, even if it's just for information purposes only. And you may have staff that are on different deals, like the ministers may get made up, but other staff might not. They might only receive sick pay. Check the contracts.
Yes.
Yeah. The other benefit that everyone is entitled to is maternity and paternity pay. And the good news is that this can be reclaimed from HMRC. So maternity is 39 weeks, are paid for 39 weeks. The member of staff can have up to a year off, but the final 12 weeks would be unpaid. So I think the first 6 weeks are paid at 90% of their wages, and the 26 weeks following are paid at £145 per week. Again, this can be made up to, and I think a lot of ministers, it is made up to full pay for the 6 months. You can only reclaim back the actual statutory maternity pay element from HMRC. So if the maternity pay comes to say £600 and you've made up their wages up to £1,000, you can only reclaim that £600 back. You can also claim back 3% national insurance on top that you would pay on top of that. So you may sometimes see, I can claim back 103% maternity pay, and that's what that means basically, the 100% of the pay, maternity pay, and the 3% national insurance. And with the dads, the paternity pay, they're entitled to 2 weeks paternity pay. Again, you can reclaim that back from HMRC. You must get all the correct documentation from your employees, the MAT 1B form for the women and the SC3 form, I think it is, for the paternity. And again, you can make that up to full pay. You just need to see what's in their contract, but you can certainly reclaim that back from HMRC. Okay.
It's probably just worth saying actually that the Baptist Union did publish a guide for maternity leave for ministers just last year, not specifically around payroll issues, but if you have got a minister particularly going on payroll on maternity leave, that can create some particular issues, and as I say, we published some guidance on that topic last year. And if you want more detailed guidance on the legal framework around employment and these various items, then our employment leaflet on our website is a good place to go.
Very quickly about maternity, if they are having their pay reduced because they're on maternity pay, it's important, if they are in a pension scheme, you do let the pension company know as well, so the contributions can reduce, because they don't want to be paying their full pension contributions if they're earning a lot less money. So just something to bear in mind. Okay, so the next slide, Payslips and record keeping. So you must provide each person on the payroll with an itemised payslip that details their pay and all their deductions, so that it allows them to check they've been paid correctly. So if they're paid a stipend and they might be paid some heat and light or manse rent, that has to be shown as 3 separate items on the payslip. You can't just show it as one sort of lump sum, so to speak. And if they do overtime for etc., you should really itemise that as an hourly rate, 6 hours done at £8.21 an hour, for example, so that it's clear and everyone knows exactly where they stand there. You need to keep any payroll records for accounting purposes, and also to respond to any HMRC queries. It has happened before where HMRC might contact you 6 months down the line and say, oh, you didn't pay us correctly in month 3 or something like that. So it's important you've got those records to go back and refer to. And you also need to keep, for accounting purposes, copies of your pay slips. So we've put on there the P32. That's the sort of report that your software should produce every month, telling you how much tax is owed to HMRC, how much national insurance is owed to HMRC, and perhaps some year-to-date totals as well. And really you need to keep those records for about 5 years. So just have a payroll folder for each year for 5 years, and then obviously you can keep reviewing that, just in case there's any queries and you do need to refer back to it, and for auditing purposes as well. When your pay is when your church accounts are audited, the pay will be quite a large part of that. Yeah. Okay. Handling expenses and benefits. Okay. Yeah, as we've put here, ministers' taxation is a complex area, particularly in relation to living accommodation. There is some really good guidance on the BU website, and that's a link to one of them, one of the handouts there. And it details all about different things that, might need to go through payroll, might not need to go through payroll. If they live in a manse or have a leaseback agreement, they can claim you can pay certain things without it being taxable. One of the things we do want to sort of just stress is heat and light payments. Up until about 2 years ago, you could pay these directly to the minister, and they would be declared on a P11D, everyone's favourite form. I think that a couple of years ago, they're trying to phase out P11Ds. So heat and light now is a payment that does need to go through payroll. It is not a benefit in kind. You don't need to register with HMRC to get permission to pay them like you used to. You can claim a percentage of it tax-free, but generally for the business use of the property. But generally, if you're paying heat and light payments over and above around probably 20–25% of the costs, that has to go through payroll, and it needs to be taxed, but not subject. It's subject to tax, sorry, but not national insurance. Any other sort of out-of-pocket expenses, mileage, a train fare, they might buy some books to prepare for a sermon. Any other out-of-pocket general expenses can just be dealt with directly. They can just fill in an expenses form. You mustn't pay more than 45p a mile. If you do go over that sum, then that is taxable.
Yeah.
Yeah, and they don't like round sum allowances, HMRC. They don't like you to just give your minister £50 a month to cover those sorts of things. It has to be a specific, they have to fill in a specific amount of how many miles they've done, etc.
If you give a round sum allowance, say, as Karen says, £50, that's likely to be a taxable benefit.
Yeah.
If they claim mileage for 100 miles, 45p a mile, £45, that's a reimbursement of cost. There is no tax implications of that.
Yeah.
We have actually had a question through on this topic on the Q&A, so don't forget the Q&A is available on the webinar. If you have any questions, please do just drop us a message here, and we'll do our best to respond to those. We've got a question here that says, it says the fuel allowance, I'm presuming a fuel allowance, and phone payments have to appear on the payslip rather than separately. So I'm assuming that this is a situation where a minister is being paid a fuel allowance and a phone payment? Yes,
so phone payments, if it's a landline in the manse, then that's absolutely fine for the church to pay that for the church to pay it.
Yep.
If they're reimbursing the minister because it's in the minister's name, then that has to go through payroll really and be taxed. If it's a mobile phone,
It has to be in the church's name.
Yeah, so if that employee left, they'd give that phone back. The church are paying for it directly. If you're reimbursing your minister £20 a month towards his own personal mobile, yes, that needs to go on the payslip and be taxed.
That's subject to tax and national insurance. And I think the same for a fuel allowance.
Yeah.
So again, allowances, if you're making an allowance towards cost, then generally that's going to be subject to full tax and national insurance and has to go through your payroll. If, on the other hand, you're providing something to enable them to do their employment. So if you're entitled as an employer to provide a phone for an employee or a worker or a minister, you're entitled to offer that, but you as the employer have to pay for it and provide it. You cannot actually reimburse that cost, because if it's reimbursed, then it becomes taxable. So there is some care to be taken here. We would, as I say, leaflet X03 does go through each of these sorts of issues in detail. But allowances, payments for expenses generally need to go payments for round sum expenses generally need to go through payroll and be taxed, which isn't necessarily the most efficient way of sorting those out.
I mean, you can put mileage expenses on a payslip and just not subject to tax and national insurance, but it's often easier just to deal with that directly if you don't, but as we've said, or anything else really does need to go through payroll. And if you're not sure, just double check. That's the best advice I can give, because it is quite complex. So, if you're not sure, double check, have a look at the handouts, and then make your decision based on that. Okay. So I think one of the last things I think we really wanted to talk to you about was the year-end process. As we are at year-end at the moment, the tax year runs from April to March. Once you've done your March payroll, what you need to do is do your year-end procedures and submit what we class as a final RTI submission to HMRC, which just tells them it's your final submission for the tax year. You then have to produce a P60 for every person on your payroll, and that's a current people on your payroll. So if you've had people leave earlier in the year, or even if they leave in March, then they've been given a P45, so they don't need a P60. So you only give a P60 to anyone that is currently employed on your payroll at the end of March. We were just talking about benefits. If there are any other benefits in kind that do need to go on a P11D, then you would need to complete one of them. It's not that common these days to have to do that, but there are odd little bits out there that do need to go on a P11D and be submitted, and you give your employee a copy of that for their tax return. You also submit that to HMRC so that they can calculate how much tax your employee does owe on those benefits. And then you move your payroll onto the new tax year, update any tax codes. This quite often is automated within your software, or you can tick that you want to upgrade all the tax codes that are 1185L by 65, for example. So there are various ways around it. And again, the HMRC website's got quite a lot of information about what tax codes to use for the coming year. And then you start your tax year all over again and start your payroll all over again. Okay, some final thoughts. Running payroll running it successfully does require care and diligence. It's very true. If you're unsure about anything whatsoever, please check the HMRC website or the BU guidance. There's a lot of guidance on the website there that gives you a lot of information. There are also people within the BU, like Philip Cook, I think he might be on the next page actually, who can offer you advice about certain things. And if it all sounds a bit too scary, or you don't want to be doing it anymore, then consider outsourcing to a payroll bureau like ourselves. We do payroll, like I say, all over the country and Wales. It's not just West of England Baptist churches. So if that's something you are interested in, then please do get in touch. So this is just some additional resources that you might find quite useful, various guidelines. and leaflets about certain items to do with payroll in terms of appointment. There's often taxation updates in the transform handouts that are given. HMRC do run a lot of webinars. They often run webinars on minimum wage, calculating sick pay, benefits in kind, that sort of thing. So it is always worth watching some of them if you're not sure. And there's some details there as well if you've got any further questions of who you can email the support services team, and Philip Cook is always happy to answer some of your questions as well. He's very good on leaseback agreements and taxation advice, isn't he, Philip? So yeah, he's a good one to ask, really.
Philip is a real blessing to our denomination, and if he does usually respond quite quickly if you email him. He's a volunteer who has supported our denomination by giving specialist tax advice for some years now, and we are very grateful for his support. We've had a further question. It's worth just saying the Q&A is open. If you have any specific questions. This is quite a complex question, so we'll try and get it, but I think it's a fairly standard one. What are the tax implications for a minister on a stipend, owning their own house? Payments are made by the church for water rates, council tax, 50% of landline and housing allowance, since church is not renting a house. The church mobile phone is in the minister's name at present and is paid as an expense. Okay. Ooh, there are some real fun ones in here.
Yeah, I mean, if they're in their own house, the best way to do it is a leaseback agreement. I don't know if it says if they've got a leaseback agreement with them.
It implies here that they don't.
No.
So essentially, if you're paying the minister a housing allowance, then that is a taxable allowance, so that needs to be treated as pay and subject to tax and national insurance. So that's probably not the most cost-effective way of setting up that sort of arrangement, and because they are then effectively in their own home rather than provided accommodation, then I believe pretty much all of what you've put here is taxable as a benefit. There might just be some way round the landline.
I mean, if they have got the leaseback agreement, then the water rates and council tax are fine. You can pay them directly. If they're just living in their own house and you're just reimbursing them, that's through payroll as a taxable benefit. I'm afraid. That really does.
That's quite an inefficient. It's quite a tax inefficient way of structuring this. And again, if the church mobile, it says here, the church mobile phone is in the minister's name and at present paid as an expense. I'm afraid that unless you are reimbursing specific phone calls at the cost of that individual phone call, i.e. you're reimbursing items on a bill that are specific to the church, then I'm afraid that's all a taxable benefit. If they've got a £20 a month deal that includes the phone and a call bundle, and some of that is personal and some of that is business, and I'm afraid all of that has to be taxable. If that phone contract was in the name of the church and provided to the minister, then that would not be a taxable benefit, and you would be able to provide all of that tax free, even if they were making personal usage as well.
I mean, even if he literally only uses it for work and he's got his own personal phone, the fact you're reimbursing him makes it the taxable benefit. So it really should be, and even if he gives it back to you, if he leaves, it has to be in the church's name to make it a non-taxable benefit. Definitely, a leaseback agreement might be the way to go with this one if you haven't got that in place, I think, to make it much more tax efficient.
Okay. So thank you. It was Carol who submitted that question, so thank you to Carol. At the moment, we don't actually have any further questions. We are at the end of our webinar and open for questions, but it seems like we don't have any further. I think, as we've said, the most important thing here is you really do need to take great care. Ministerial taxation in particular is a complex area. We've just touched on a couple of those things, particularly around housing. And so please do read the guidance that we publish, particularly leaflet X03 is the key one about taxation for churches and ministers. And if you have specific questions, then please do get in touch via the support services email address that was provided, so supportservices@baptist.org.uk, or get in touch with Philip Cook if it's a very specific taxation item. And yeah, as I say, we would welcome your questions and delight in helping churches to do all this sometimes quite complex work efficiently. I think if you are, having heard all of this, rather daunted and feel like you don't feel like this is a topic you want to take on, then again do consider outsourcing. We at Baptist Together are very grateful for the support of Karen in producing this webinar today. We don't feel any shame in recommending that churches consider the West of England Baptist Payroll Company, because they really do more Baptist churches than I think anyone else. There are, I think some of the other regional Baptist associations do have a service, but I think the West of England one is the most widespread and certainly available to churches outside of their local area. So yeah, if you want to inquire about that, please do look on the West of England Baptist Association website, where they have a section on this, and you can see how to get in touch. And they are growing rapidly, I believe.
Growing rapidly, yes. We've got quite a few new churches joining us in April, so the figure that we put up that we've got, I think is probably gone up by about 100 now already. So yeah, I mean it is very daunting, payroll, and I fully understand that, and that's part of my job really, to take that pressure away from some of the treasurers. We've just gone over quite generically. We've covered a lot of topics. We could drill down into each of those items in so much more detail, but obviously we don't have the time to do that today. So yeah, we've just tried to give you a very sort of good overview really of how to run a payroll, and if it does sort of trigger any thoughts in your mind or questions, then like we said, feel free to get in touch.
Okay, it doesn't appear that while we've been talking, any more questions have come in. So I'd again like to just extend my thanks to Karen and the West of England Baptist Payroll Company for supporting us in today's webinar. We thank you all for joining us. The slides will be posted on the website, on the Baptist website, so baptist.org.uk/webinars. We'll get you to all our webinars, and we will also be posting a recording of this webinar there early next week. So thank you very much to Karen again.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
And thank you again to all of you for joining. And we look forward to you joining us again for future webinars. Thank you very much.
Thank you.